everyone, and welcome back to Soy Advisor. I'm Kelsey Litchfield, coming to you from cloudy west central Illinois. Rumors of rain today, but the meteorologist seemed pretty confident on TV last night. I'm not so well. It's going to be very isolated and scattered. A lot of planters last night. I could see their headlights at night and trying to get it in while they can. Late nights, early mornings, I'm guessing. So it's continuing along here. But for a bigger snapshot across the state, according to the USDA, planting progress in Illinois as of the week ending May 12 shows soybeans at 39%, slightly below the 5-year average of 43%, with 20% already emerged. Corn progress stands at 42%, trailing the 5-year average of 56%, with 25% emerged. Winter wheat heading is at a high of 83%, surpassing the 5-year average of 52%. And then winter wheat condition is predominantly rated as 56% good, 21% excellent, and 17% fair. So this week over on X, Twitter, whatever the heck people call it nowadays, I just call it X/Twitter. We ran 2 polls to kind of gauge the farmers and where they were in planting corn and soybeans. And of course, the results varied. It was much of a mixed bag. So my first question to you all, as you begin your updates in your region, have you observed more corn or soybeans being planted in your region, or would you say it's evenly split? I know people were trying to get in soybeans. Now they're switching over to corn. So I'm just curious where that's all at. So let's start with Karen.
First of all, you get to plant already? What? I'm still watching the pounds drain. We had about one good day this week that a lot went in. We have a few soybean fields up. I saw my first corn fields up last Friday, but we're still, it seems like every time we get close, we get another inch. So I've had almost 2 inches since the last time we spoke. So, and I know there's places northeast of here, like around Fairbury, that got 2 inches in a few hours the other day. So we did get to run a fair amount on Monday. Some of them went on Sunday. So now we wait to see if the Mother's Day curse comes through. But I feel like there's a lot more north of us that's in than south than in this area right here.
Okay, call me oblivious. I saw the Mother's Day curse online. What exactly is it? I hear differing theories per se, but what's the take on yours?
Usually, I shouldn't say usually, on occasion, it seems more often than not, if you plant on Mother's Day, there's usually some sort of disaster. Mm-hmm. And it's not usually widespread, but it's it happens for somebody. So, but we had talked a little bit about it, I think, on Twitter, and I was like, at this point, I would go and worry about curses later. So who knows?
Do what you gotta
I'm
do.
a Cubs fan though, so I might not be the one to listen to.
That's true. Very true. Eric, let's take it over to you.
Yeah, so this week has been like over the weekend, there was quite a bit of activity, but then we've had just enough rain in the area just to be an annoyance factor. I mean, the top quarter of an inch of soil may look wet, but we've had guys still running pretty much all week here in pockets here and there. But there are still some pretty wet areas too, I would say, in this area. Yesterday I was down around the I-70 corridor, down around KZ, doing some scouting down there yesterday afternoon. Corn looked pretty good all in all, but even still in that area, I'm still finding areas of frost injury, especially corn that maybe not necessarily frost, but definitely cold injury from corn that was planted around that 14th, 15th of April. So all of the challenging conditions that we had in the latter part of April are still showing through very strongly. It's not widespread, but it can easily be found in the field. So a lot of the corn throughout the area in my area from I-70 all the way to northern Champaign, somewhere in that V2 to V3 range seems to catch a lot of it. And then beans are that maybe getting to V1 stage. So that catches a lot of the growth stages. Weed pressure, I mean, it's it's all fair game now. Everything is coming up, and even getting some growers that are already having to start post applications in our area too. So, the fun begins now.
Thanks, Eric. I was traveling down to Decatur last Saturday with my dad. They're going on a Corvette drive out to the Chevy Museum down Decatur, if you didn't know that was down there. And on the way, a lot of weedy fields, a lot of the, I presume, the butterweed, as I've been hearing, those bright yellow weeds a lot in the fields, and not a lot of activity going on down there, but definitely a lot of weeds in the fields. I thought, so a lot of people are having this problem. So it seemed very widespread. So thanks, Eric. Kelly, I'll come over to you, which I know you don't have good news.
Let's see. Nothing really happened last week until Saturday, and um, there was a small pocket to the east over here towards the Ohio River that um, one guy went to the field and started side dressing corn, and several others followed. And it really needed until Monday, but so Saturday and Sunday there was a considerable amount of side dressing going on in one county. Monday, um, there was more field work, a lot of working ground. Again, just they're pushing it where everybody's. We've now hit that we're going to push it, and then by Monday afternoon it started raining again. So Tuesday here we had almost 3 inches of rain, two of it in I don't know about 10, 12 minutes it seemed like. Um, we're just wet everywhere. Um, Talked to DSM for a seed company yesterday. He said that their weekly call the week before, so last week, he said his dealers were predicting zero replant, and he said since Thursday of last week, he said the replant calls are coming in like crazy. So um, there's going to be lots of pockets of replant. As far as what's planted, um, it's very interesting. So I'd say it's 50-50. Some guys have got corn planted and no beans. Some guys have got beans planted and no corn. Some have got a little of both. Um, and I would say it's 50% planted the first time, and I don't know how much is going to be replanted the second time. So watching the forecast yesterday or day before yesterday, it looks like we're going to be out until the 1st of June. So
Did you get hit with any of that hail again this past few days?
no hail. No hail. I did talk to a farmer who some of those, I guess, images that made it to social media, the ground covered in hail. He was in that area to the west of us. His wheat crop is gone. So he said just a little stem sticking up. That's the other thing. The wheat is we're on. I had an interesting call yesterday. Um, the wheat is turning quickly, and one guy he said I may just plant corn after wheat instead of beans because he said I know I'll probably be able to get in the wheat field. So double crop corn is being talked about.
Hey Kelly,
Desperate times call for desperate measures.
I got a question for you. Is the cicadas coming out down in southern Illinois, or is it just rumors I keep seeing online?
That's funny because I keep hearing that they're here. I mean, we're not hearing them here at our home, but Monday where we were trying to soil sample in the bottoms, you needed earplugs. So
Really?
yeah, so they're here. It's just they're in isolated areas and not as widespread as everybody makes it out to be.
Okay.
They're up in Decatur. Pam Smith, if you follow Pam at all, from DTN, she's been documenting, and she's got tons in her yard, but they haven't started singing yet. So she thinks they're all females so far.
The other thing that just this morning before this call started, and I had to laugh out loud, the first reports of black cutworm in the corn. So Kelly Estes nailed it almost within a day.
Yeah, I saw that on Twitter yesterday too. Thanks, Kelly. We'll have some more questions after we get through with everyone. Drew, I'll hand it over to you for your update.
Good morning. Yeah, so it's funny that you mentioned Kelly, black cutworm. I'm actually heading up to Sterling area this morning to start looking for some black cutworm feeding. So we've got a lot of reports up that way that they're starting to cut off some corn and probably a little bit of beans. As far as planting progress goes, really it kind of comes down to, I kind of cut my territory into two different areas. So north of Route 80, they're actually pretty well done. Some bottom ground, things like that, but there's been a lot of planting progress up that direction, more so than we would normally see and think about. So that's interesting. And then as we get south of 80, even down into that, I kind of call it the Peoria type area, over to Monmouth and so on. That area is mostly done on beans, I would say, and then we have a lot of corn to go. I don't know really any operations through that area that are done on corn. They got a good hit first, and that's when a lot of beans got put in, and then they just haven't been able to get in to get the corn finished up. So I'm getting a lot of questions on cutworm. Like I said, that's kind of my day-to-day. And then also a lot of questions on white grubs in the last 48 hours. So what I would say is this is going to be a year of scouting, guys. I mean, we need to be out there. We need to watch what's going on, because a lot of the pests that we're talking about aren't really ones that have an economic damage for the most part, but they can, but we have to watch them and scout them to see kind of where they're going to turn into. A little bit of a group 15 herbicide injury as well. Starting to see that a little bit more. Eric probably has a better grasp on that than myself, but it seems like there is definitely a difference this year in encapsulated versus non, like some of the generics and so on versus like the reservoir or something like that has reservoir XL, I should say, that has an encapsulation on it. So that's kind of what we're looking at.
Thanks, Drew. And Craig, last but not least.
Yeah, I guess I don't have a whole lot to add after everybody that's went through and give an update. Most everything's pretty spot on. Around here, our on a research side anyway, and I know my dad went through the weekend pretty hard, trying to get either crop in if we had the seed to get it in. Monmouth, I was talking to a guy yesterday there. Same thing, hit and miss depending on where the rain came. They were able to go or I'll say push a little harder in areas. We did have a guy in around Altamont that was planting, and we went down there to plant our plots, and we couldn't get the trench to close. It was just too wet. But the farmer's like, I have to go. And I understand that there's that too. The logistics piece versus the research side piece is a little different for us sometimes, but I would say, thinking back to 2019, the later we get, the harder guys are going to start pushing things. And so, it's just sometimes that's the way it's got to be with logistics and trying to get across your acres that you're trying to manage. So that all becomes a factor. Yes, black cutworms, I heard of. Grubs or slugs, bean leaf beetles, I've seen those, some damage with the herbicides. Oh shoot, what was the other thing? Oh, the one thing we haven't really discussed here yet is switching to earlier RMs or crops or that sort of thing. I'm sure that's still on the table. The one piece I'll say, at least from a breeding perspective, is you're probably going to give up yield when you do that, because I'll be honest, we don't do a lot of 100 RM corn in central Illinois. It's more to the north, so it's just not something we select for and breed for here in central Illinois. It's the 110, 115s, some 105s is where you start seeing that. So there's a reason for it, right? Like the breeding piece works. There's a reason that you're going to have to give that up now. Back to my point, logistics, having to get through acres, it makes, that piece makes sense. So if you're looking at June, I would think that's about the time to start thinking about doing that. And I don't know, Eric or Drew, if they have better ideas on what availability for seed would be in those situations. I would say talk to your salesman or your seed people. And yeah, that's pretty much it. We've been going hard where we can, and there's just places we can't.
I saw on Twitter earlier, it's been a spring of patience, and I thought, when is it not patience? Honestly, that's it's always that. Um, you mentioned 2019, Craig, and Kelly and I were talking back and forth yesterday. And Kelly, you said you went from 2012 to 2019 in how long?
About 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, we went from drought conditions to saturated in less than 3 weeks. I've got one customer over towards the we'll just call it the Belleville Metroplex area. Since the 11th of April's had 21 inches of rain.
Holy cow.
And they have nothing. Well, he told me they planted 60 acres and fully intend to replant it.
Yeah, I was talking to an agronomist, and it was in the Fort Wayne, Indiana area, and they haven't planted anything yet.
Yeah, I've got I don't know how many customers who have nothing planted, or let's put it this way, they have less than probably a 2% of what they farm planted, and most of that will get replanted.
Yeah, I guess that was one other thing the guy in the west said. He was starting to see some guys trying to spot in where the lower areas they got, I don't know if it was frost damaged or just ponded, spotting those places back in over the weekend. So there is that too. So don't forget about your ponds, and make sure if it's, I guess assess it and see if it's coming up or if it needs a replant situation.
That is the one thing I would mention, though, to really assess it. Don't assume anything on the replant portion, because I was in some yesterday actually that I think they've been in the ground for a month, and the wet area was just now. I mean, they're just starting to emerge, and it's probably economically not going to be a reason to replant. Now, weed control wise, that could be another kind of option on meeting that. But as far as a yield situation, I don't think he's going to get any better off by replanting that.
Yeah,
Anything else?
I was just going to say, as far as
Go ahead.
getting into replant scenarios and everything, I mean, try to work with your seed suppliers, give them as much leeway as possible, because likely, I mean, if you're thinking you're going to get the same genetics or even make big maturity jumps, it's going to be tough to get some of that material because it's just simply not in place. And like a lot of years, there was a lot of cuts this year on things. Things got switched around last minute. So please just, I guess, just continue on being patient. Work with your seed suppliers. Give them as much heads up as possible. And then two, with soybeans, if you're looking at replant scenarios, now I understand ponds are one thing that, when there's whole blank areas, that's one thing. But if we're looking at, other areas of the field, from my experience, it seems like a lot of growers are comfortable with 100,000, still being out there. But, you look at any of Sean Castillo's work from Purdue, and I've even had experience with this myself. Don't be afraid to, maybe go down around that 80,000 mark before you really consider hard replants, because you'd be surprised what soybeans can really recover from and come back from and still, provide a nice yield advantage. And not to mention, we look at diesel fuel prices, labor's not getting any cheaper. So all those type of things, I would strongly encourage you to pencil some of that stuff out before making that emotional decision on replant, just because simply, maybe stands are a little bit thinner than you might like.
Yeah, I know Shelby also wrote an article about increasing soy population as we get later, and that's a good article on the website. So
Yeah,
as we get
definitely.
later, pushing your population on your soy up a little bit higher, because they're not going to be able to put on as many nodes when we get into later plantings.
Yeah, great mention, Craig. I will put a plug in there, illsoyadvisor.com. If you go to the Fieldnotes blog, all of our Soy Envoys are writing blogs, doing videos besides this weekly podcast. So those are deeper topics into soybean populations. Eric, you just did one on PPO injury, where we can dive in a little bit more with those topics. So I highly recommend, if you're listening, to go read those blogs as well. Anything else that you're seeing out there that no one else is talking about or should be on farmers' radar? I know we're looking at replant. Sounds like guys are pushing it while they can. These spotty windows, you got to do what you got to do, but maybe not push it too hard that the rest of the season just collapses, and then you have more problems down the road. But anything else that you can think of?
It's better to be patient now because in our case, we don't have enough time to plant it twice. We haven't even planted the first time in most cases. So
yeah, if I was going to plant, if I was just going to do something desperate and plant in the mud, I would have rather done it in March or April than do it in May or June.
The other thing I would mention too is the growing season that we have right now. If you have something in, and I guess I may be talking for a little bit further north, I've talked to some retailers and they're a little concerned. They're behind on booking fungicide and a few different inputs like that. And it's just something to remember is if I had a dime for every time I heard last year, I'm not throwing any more money at this crop. It's a disaster. I'm not throwing any more money at it. It's just wasted. And then we had some of the best yields we've ever seen. Let's not give up on this crop already. There's still a lot of growing season to go. That means putting in as good a conditions as we can, but B, continuing to scout it and not just pushing off some of those things that we know add yield. So that would just be the one thing I would mention, because that conversation's already starting to happen a little bit. Maybe to the south that makes a little bit more sense, but you get up to the north here and we still got a lot of yield potential in some of these fields.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a moot point to talk about yield right now? It seems too early. I hear some people talking about it already. We did a podcast with Dr. Connor Sybil last week talking about switching from corn to beans. He says you still got time. So it seems like that yield conversation, it's still early for that, but it's always on top of mind, I'm sure, as well. Anyone have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I'll throw something out there on it. So as we move from May 15th towards the middle of June, our approach in the South is different than it is for you guys up north. We go to longer maturities. So we'll drop the 110 days and start going to the 115s and later, because they actually, with the GDUs and whatnot, they actually pick up GDUs faster. It seems like and the chances of getting that fill, now you're going to have to dry that corn, but the chances of getting the GDUs and getting a fill and getting a bigger yield is better with the longer maturities and the shorter maturities down here. And so, and as far as switching goes, I mean, and I put this in my video I did yesterday, I sent Kelsey, is that, I mean, for most people, switching from corn to beans is not an option because of the residuals they have down. And so, I mean, I think unless you've not done any type of herbicide program, the talk of switching is a moot point. And I always get a kick out of people says, well, it's about time to switch. Yeah, well, if you haven't done any tillage, and you don't have any herbicides down and a whole lot of other lists, then yeah, then maybe. But if you got out there and sprayed and got something down, you're probably locked into what you're going to do at this point.
The guys that farm in the river bottoms usually choose herbicides that can go either way, but the majority of farmers don't do that. As far as yield wise, I mean, unless we get a long fall, we're a little bit behind on soybeans because we'd really like them to be flowering by Memorial Day. So I guess at this point, I'm more comfortable planting corn than soybeans, because I know that people will be disappointed in the yields because the 85s are probably out, at least in this area, since we don't have much soybeans planted.
And I'll just give a quick plug to Drew's comment about, continuing to monitor his crop and to manage his crop, even as we think about even later in the season with fungicide season. But, on this corn, I just want to kind of remind everybody that, that some of this corn that's out there planted that was around 15th, of April, or maybe even earlier, this stuff is going to be quickly approaching V5. And so we got to remember what's going on at V5, and that's we're setting rows around and kernels long. And so that's a critical growth stage. And so we need to continue to try to ensure that corn doesn't have a bad day. I know there's been a lot of bad days so far, but remembering that anything we can do to prevent a bad day. So, maybe if that's a herbicide application, maybe if we're getting off label or we need to do something different for post applications because of growth stages, remember there are cutoffs around that V5. There are a lot of cutoffs for maybe some of those conventional type herbicides in corn, but then there's also a lot of cutoffs when we get to that R1 timeframe in soybeans. And so remember to get out and check your growth stages before we start doing post applications, because I have a feeling this year they're likely going to sneak up on you.
And that's that April planted corn down here is quickly getting too tall to side dress. So we got guys talking about running dry boxes or flying stuff on or wide dropping stuff on, and that's like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. So nothing good happens at that point.
Yeah.
I'll also mention too that make sure that you're ready to spray if you're planting, because we still have a lot of soybeans going in, but there's people running into the fact that they're using some of the PPOs and they get into plant and then they can't spray for more than 3 days, and that goes off label. And we can see a lot more damage with those PPOs if we break that 3 days after planting and spray after that. So there needs to be some change up too if you're not able to, do your timing as you had planned. You need to reevaluate and make sure that you're not going to cause yourself some issues. I can't imagine V5 corn.
And a little reminder that labels are made for a reason. I've been in a few fields where they just have thrown the label out the window, and we're seeing that. So thinking that you can sneak through and, oh, that'll be fine. Please do not spray 2,4-D over non-GMO beans 2 days after you plant them. Things like that. The labels are there for a reason. And yes, they're a legal document. Some guys like to stretch them, but you will start to see crop response.
And if you can't get your furrows closed, that brings up a whole another set of issues with herbicides too. So if your furrows aren't closing, you definitely want to make sure that you're not spraying things that are going to cause issues for that germinating crop.
Real quick before we end, my last question. This past weekend, yes, was Mother's Day. People were out in planters and they had a GPS problem for those that were in those tractors. It made that the ones, if you don't know, the solar flares were being blamed, or a solar storm was being blamed for the GPS not working in tractors. I heard John Deere. I don't know if that was all of them. I haven't looked into it, but that has made major news headlines, not only in ag media, but I saw CBS News, the New York Times was reporting on it. So now not only are many farmers delayed, but then they get in a planter and their GPS is not working. So adding more insult to injury a little bit there. But I'm curious, did any of you have any stories, or did you hear of anyone complaining about it, or did you not hear about it at all?
I'll just go ahead and say I've seen GPS errors that have started long before the solar flares. I mean, the corn that I was in yesterday scouting, there was in some cases 60-inch wide guess rows. So I'm not sure what was going on there, if it's a subscription, not paying for the correct subscription or what, but the GPS errors aren't isolated to the solar flare event.
So they can't blame the solar flares for those mistakes.
So we're at the top of the solar cycle right now. The solar cycles last about 11 years. So we're at the top of the current solar cycle. And as a ham radio operator, the last few days, the ability to talk around the world, depending upon what time of day it is and when the flares have happened, and what side of where the sun is at in relationship to you when the flares happen. There's been days. I've got a little computer over here when I was talking about that computer before we started, that what we call a ham clock, and it's showing propagation, the ability of signals to reach around the world. And you'll see, usually it looks like a starburst type of a firework where you just have all the lines going across out. There's been days like even right now where there are no lines on there because the solar flare has essentially shut down all of the higher frequency stuff. So yeah, it is real. I can talk to Poland and Hungary from my house. I can't even talk across the county right now because of the way the solar flare is. So it's real.
Interesting. I might see some more advertisements. Some people are saying, well, I better put markers back on my planter. So there's a sales ad for you.
And on the research side, we heavily rely on GPS. We can't plant without it. And I don't know that we were shut down. We're not on a John Deere system. So, but I know we have a high end GPS setup just because of what we have to do and track. So maybe that helps.
If you're on RTK system, you probably saw nothing. If you were on a satellite like a WASP, then you probably saw some loss. But again, those signals are different than the radio waves from a radio. So it's like, well, my Sirius XM didn't go out, and like, no, because it's a digital signal.
Well, we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. Thank you, everyone, for hopping on this morning. And just a note to our audience listeners, we won't be podcasting next week as I'll be out. So we'll regroup here in 2 weeks. I'll give you guys a week off, and hopefully we come back with better news that first week of June, or we might be talking about, dare I say, prevent plant or replant still. So we'll see. But enjoy the Memorial Day holiday, or remember those who have fallen for us, and we will regroup here soon. So thanks, everyone.